We spoke to Monzo, we spoke to Revolut, we spoke to Deliveroo. We went to Swansea, for example, to see the DVLA and realized that all of these organizations were struggling with the same problem. And I think that's where my entrepreneur hat really came on. I was like, oh, there's definitely an opportunity here. I just felt like I wanted to be in the weeds, on the ground, really getting my hands dirty on that execution. And then realized that like the static nature of spreadsheets made that very challenging because you have different inflow patterns, you have different capacity available. And so came to the realization we needed software for it.
Today on the podcast, we have Natasha Retenshi-Stein, who's the CEO and founder of Surfboard. They're a workforce management software aimed at customer service teams. Natasha's been able to squeeze a huge amount of different experiences into a short amount of time. She initially worked at Goldman Sachs in investment banking, before joining Piton Capital as a VC and trying to work on that and try to invest in early stage companies, before moving across to Bulb, where she held various roles, where she constantly pushed herself out of her comfort zone into new areas. One of these struggles she had while at Bulb was about customer service teams and being able to deal with the huge influx of calls they would have and how the team could manage this. She then struggled with this, and it was in the back of her mind for years before deciding this is a problem that she needed to solve, because she could just see so many other companies struggling with it too. After quitting, she was able to raise her pre-seed very quickly, which enabled her to hire a team, create a product that customers are loving now, and she's been able to get great feedback and scale the business up. I hope you enjoy this episode. I'm Mama from the Bay HQ, and this podcast is powered by HSBC Innovation Banking. So, Natasha, so great to have you here today. If we rewind back to the beginnings of everything, when you were a kid, what did you want to be one day? What did you hope to be when you grew up?
Yeah, so having Asian parents, my brother is a doctor, and my parents expected me to be a lawyer. And so I was quite compliant with that, went along with it, and so wanted to be a lawyer. I left Canada when I was 18 to move to London, studied at the London School of Economics, and within my first week there, I went to a law firm networking event. I distinctly remember it was at Slaughter and May, and I just thought, God, this looks direly boring, and decided then I wasn't going to become a lawyer and instead pursued a different path.
So what made you move to London?
My family, we have a lot of relatives here. So we had spent a lot of time here when I was growing up. We came most summers for a few weeks. So I knew London, I knew the UK quite well. Having grown up in Canada, the education systems are also quite compatible. So you didn't have to do any special exams or anything. And it was a good opportunity to, not every day do you get a chance to just pick up and move continents. And so I think there's no better opportunity to do it than when you're moving for university, because you're starting fresh anyway. It's a great chance to move somewhere, but also have that safety net that you're guaranteed to make friends and have your accommodation sorted and figure out how you get food on the table quite easily.
Having to move to London to study law, and then obviously now deciding maybe it's not the right path. How did you feel at that point? Because it's quite an identity crisis, I guess.
It's actually a great point. So one thing that I also love about just the British post-secondary education system is that you don't have to study the fields that you're intending to work on. So I ended up studying economic history at the London School of Economics, not law or anything. So it was obviously a very generalist course where you could end up going into anything. So I remember at that networking event at Slaughter and May, the only thing that interested me there was they talked about how they'd worked on the merger between British Airways and Iberia. And I was like, oh, that sounds really interesting. And then I realized the interesting stuff that they'd worked on wasn't the legal aspect of it, but actually like the deal dynamics of it. So decided to start my career in investment banking, which isn't a huge pivot and obviously keeps the Asian parents somewhat happy.
And then what was that? So going into investment banking, and you started Goldman Sachs, right?
I did, yes.
How was that, like trying to apply for those jobs and get that? Was that comfortable, or did it feel quite difficult at the time?
It definitely felt quite difficult. I think, again, the advantage of being at university somewhere like London is that you're within a stone's throw of where the European headquarters of all these places are. So you're very well guided through the process, both from the fact that there are these networking events, they walk you through the application process. You hear very much what it's like working at those organizations, so you know what to say in the application, you know what resonates. You can speak to a lot of people and get a feel of the different divisions within the organization, but also because I guess when you're studying at a university like the LSE, I'd probably say like 80% of people are applying for the same job. So you certainly are well supported in that regard. But obviously it's like hyper competitive because you don't want to be the person that doesn't get a job. And so you're always to some degree keeping up with the Joneses.
So you obviously did keep up with the Joneses. You got the job at Goldman. What was it like there when you got there? Was it what you hoped it would be?
Yeah, they managed your expectations quite well. I think I would say I'm obviously running a startup now. And one thing I admire that Goldman and other organizations, be it banking, consulting, law, etc., do quite well is that you know what you're getting before you get in and you very much sign up to it. They're not telling you, even though I think Goldman did put in like a ping pong table, that it's all about playing ping pong and whatever. You know that you're going to have to work hard. You know that it's quite intense. You know it's very competitive. But I think that's why a lot of people go in. And so it definitely lived up to those expectations. But before the job, you do, I think, like a 10-week internship. And so on the internship, you're very much doing the work that you're going to be doing later on, obviously with a more distilled and shorter time frame. So 10 weeks feels bearable. But then when it's, the 2 years that I did at Goldman, it's definitely a lot longer.
And then what made you move on from Goldman?
So I was at Goldman between 2012 and 2014. And what was really interesting that was happening globally, but Europe was certainly picking up on, was that there was just a lot more happening within the technology industry. So I remember when I was at Goldman, we were pitching for the business for, I think Just Eat was going public. Farfetch was doing larger fundraisers. There were many more of these success stories that were European, born and bred technology businesses that I think when I started at Goldman, I thought I would very much go down that traditional path where people either go into private equity funds or hedge funds, et cetera. But as I settled in and as I started spending more time and reading about these companies and seeing the work that Goldman was doing for these companies, I got increasingly excited about how quickly the European ecosystem was evolving and the chance to be part of that. So I ended up joining a venture capital fund called Piton Capital in 2014. They had just closed their second fund. So we're looking to move past just like the two founders doing all the deal sourcing, portfolio management, fund development, et cetera, and hiring a team. And so I thought it was an exciting opportunity. At the time I thought it was risky because it was the first like hire that they had made. But in hindsight, when you then become an entrepreneur yourself, you realize there's a lot more risk that you can take.
And like picking to work for those guys, right? When there's only two people there and you're from this massive organization, Goldman, what was behind that logic there? Because obviously, were you applying for like other VCs and maybe larger or more established? Because I imagine it must have been quite intense when you're just you and the founders.
I had met other VCs and I viewed the move to Piton as quite binary. It was either this is going to be career-changing, life-changing, a great opportunity, or this is going to go terribly. But I'm young enough, I think I was like 22 at the time, where if it goes terribly, you can course correct relatively quickly. And I was really, really fortunate that it went really well. I mean, I spent 5 years at Piton. The two founders, Andrew and Greg, are still very close mentors. I spent a lot of time just getting their thoughts on things today in my journey as an entrepreneur. So that couldn't have gone better for me. I think if I think about the steps that I made in my career, that's probably the one that I think worked out the best for me.
And what did you learn while you were there?
I think, number one, they were professionalizing or institutionalizing the fund from scratch. And so despite the fact that a VC fund operates very differently from a business, we had to figure out how Piton positioned itself in the market, how we made ourselves known to entrepreneurs that were relevant to the types of businesses we invested in. I think the most tangible learning for me, especially in my journey now, was just on that portfolio management side of things. So you see the obvious things like what investors expect at each stage of a business, but then you go to board meetings and you're seeing a lot of the strategy and execution that goes behind that of how do you make sure that the unit economics pay off? How do you make sure there's a clear go-to-market strategy? How do you make sure that the product and the addressable market are working hand in hand to continue to saturate specific and relevant markets? So I think that was intellectually and academically insightful for me. And obviously, like every week, you're making bets on different themes of businesses that are going to succeed. And so, I think that like intellectual stimulation was really good. And then obviously seeing how businesses actually run when they're in the universe of being VC funded.
So it was quite interesting about your background as well. So in not a huge amount of time, you had the corporate background at Goldman, then investor background at VC, and then obviously you're now running a startup. And then you also had the operating experience at scale up as well. Mm. So it's kind of interesting that in such a short amount of time, you've had quite like you've had 4 different main parts, but it's really covered all the different bases, I guess, and makes you a better entrepreneur. And what was behind leaving the VC fund to the next step there?
I had been at Piton for 5 years and I had been enjoying my time a lot there. Like I really didn't see myself leaving. And then suddenly, I think as I had been there for 4 years, I realized that the part that I was enjoying the most about the role was the portfolio management side of things. And I thought, okay, I'm enjoying this the most. It's maybe taking up 20 to 30% of my time, but I want stuff like this to take 100% of my time. And you have some VCs that have like operating teams. I think that's a different structure. It's a lot more common in the US. It wasn't really what I was going after because I felt like that was a bit of like a halfway house of where I wanted to be. And I just felt more and more as I was attending board meetings and spending time with portfolio companies that I had this envy of them where we talk about something, we talk about like, oh, could you think about trying this acquisition to make the unit economics better? Or what if you launched in this geography? Or what if you launched this new vertical? But I would never see it end to end. It would be the ideation and then the follow up of like, oh, so how did that go? And I think because of that arm's length distance you have as an investor, I just felt like I wanted to be in the weeds, on the ground, really getting my hands dirty on that execution. And so I spoke to Andrew and Greg at Piton, and they were extremely supportive. Both of them had been operators and entrepreneurs previously. And so they brainstormed with me, the right stage business, the right type of business. And then the rest is history. I joined Bulb in April 2019.
And making that big step as well there, how was that? So obviously going from investment background, going into that new environment, did you find your feet quickly, or was it the adjustment period?
I was daunted when I first joined. I think that was probably the most daunted I've ever felt in my career because I had this imposter syndrome where I was like, am I just someone who is able to thematically come up with things, but when it actually comes to push comes to shove and getting things done and having these meaningful results, can I do it? And so where I was quite lucky in my time at Bulb is that I knew I had a skill set in finance. I had told Hayden, the CEO, at the beginning, I didn't want to be spending most of my time on finance because I really wanted to broaden my skill set, broaden my horizons, and become a true operator. But luckily, at the time, Bulb was spending time on thinking about its financing structure between debt, equity, other forms of financing, given the uniqueness of the operating model of being a utility company. And so because it was relatively comfortable, I felt like that was a good opportunity for me to show the company and show Hayden and Amit, the founders, that I could add value without pushing myself to unknown terrain or unknown territory. So that was a good opportunity for me to, just like get in the weeds, get my hands dirty super quickly without feeling uncomfortable. And then at the same time, other stuff fell on my plate. So the business was scaling the customer service team. There were challenges and opportunities that came from that. I got helicoptered into that function to figure out how to scale it whilst optimizing service performance as well as costs. And then I stepped into the risk and regulatory function for a few months leading that. And then when the pandemic hit, as you can imagine, payments became a struggle of customers paying us and making sure they were paying us the right amount relative to their usage. So I headed the revenue assurance function. So each time I feel like I tried to take on as much as I felt comfortable doing, and then I added it to the uncomfortable and then stepped into the uncomfortable. But it was nice to have something to start with that I could feel comfortable and own end to end.
And do you feel like during your time there, you obviously said you're worried about can you execute or not? I'm assuming you've proven yourself wrong, right? You could obviously.
I hope so. I don't like marking my own homework, but I'd like to think so.
And during that experience as well, obviously with the customer service teams, was that where the idea for your startup came across, or where did this startup idea come into this?
Yeah, it was exactly that. So it was pretty early on in my journey at Bulb. I mean, like from day one when I joined, we were struggling with an email backlog. Like many other energy companies, we struggled with phone wait times as demand got much busier, especially when there's seasonality in that industry. You have price changes, you have billing cycles. And so in that, I realized that we had a challenge of making sure we had the right people working on the right things at the right time. I started off by building spreadsheets to try to organize it. And then realized that like the static nature of spreadsheets made that very challenging because you have different inflow patterns, you have different capacity available. And so came to the realization we needed software for it, ran an RFP process to look for software and realized everything out there was extremely antiquated, didn't fit with the technology stack that we had at Bulb. Eventually, when we implemented, it was a very long implementation cycle and never really worked the way we expected it to. So that planted the seeds for what is today Surfboard, the business that I founded. But I was still pretty early on in my journey at Bulb. I think I was in my first 6 months there. So I thought, there's no way I'm going to leave a brand new role where I'm learning so much and start something new. But I couldn't get the idea out of my head. So I sat on it for about just under 2 years. And then eventually, when I had sat on it for long enough, I had also gone through the process of speaking to many other companies, really with my Bulb hat on of, hey, we're struggling with this. How are you dealing with it? And we spoke to Monzo, we spoke to Revolut, we spoke to Deliveroo. We went to Swansea, for example, to see the DVLA and realized that all of these organizations were struggling with the same problem. And I think that's where my entrepreneur hat really came on. And I was like, oh, there's definitely an opportunity here and someone has got to capture it. It took me just a while to realize that someone was going to be me.
Did you start to on the side while you were still working at Bulb, or was it clean cut?
It was clean cut. So I pondered it for some time. And then I think in August 2020, it was still one of the lockdowns. And I went to go see Hayden, the CEO of Bulb at the time, to tell him, look, I have this idea. I'm not 100% certain, but I'm leaning towards it and just want to get your views. And I think Hayden probably had the same conversation with me that Andren at Piton had a few years prior, which is, look, I would never stop someone from being an entrepreneur. I think if you have the idea, you should definitely run with it and you'll probably have no regrets. And so I think it was probably that conversation I had with him that made things quite definitive in what came next.
And then what were those first steps you took? So I guess you handed in a notice.
Yeah.
And how are people around you at that point as well? Were your friends supportive? Were your family supportive?
Was my family supportive? Every time I say something that my dad finds mildly intellectual, he still says, Natasha, you could have been a lawyer. So I think he's still hoping for that. My friends were very supportive. I think the most important support I got was from my husband, because obviously, financially, it's a sacrifice for someone to leave a job and start something from scratch, but there's a lot of uncertainty. But he knew I had been mulling it over for some time. I want to say 29 at the time. So I was at a good age to be doing it. And so friends were supportive, husband was supportive. I think the best validation for me was the support that I got from the founders of Bulb, the rest of the leadership team. And then, of course, I also spoke to, the founders of Piton as well. And I think the combination of all those people are people who I highly respect and who also understand the peaks and troughs of entrepreneurship quite well. So getting their validation was really reassuring for me.
So you've got a blank slate now, right? You're starting fresh. What are the first steps you take? How did you get this going to where it is today?
So I think my last week at Bulb was in November 2020. And I thought, okay, I'm going to take a week off and just do nothing. Unfortunately, that week coincided with the week of the US election. And I don't know if you remember, but that election just dragged on so much that everyone was just glued to their TVs for 5 days. So that was pretty much my week off. And then the next week, what I did was I continued to do research. So try to really saturate as many people as I could speak to. So I did a lot of cold outbounding to leaders of customer service functions who could give insight around how they were working and what they were looking for in an optimal solution. In parallel, the other thing I wanted, which didn't end up working out for me, was I wanted to start Surfboard with a co-founder. So I started that search for a co-founder. And as I started that search for a co-founder, I reached out to a few VCs just saying, hey, look, I'm thinking of starting this business. I'm looking for a co-founder. You obviously have a broad network. Is there anyone that you know, especially on the technical side? And I didn't get a co-founder out of it, but a lot of VCs came back being like, hey, don't know anyone, but would love to look at it from an investing perspective. And then before I knew it, we were raising a pre-seed round. So by December 2020, we had a term sheet signed for our pre-seed round. We closed that in January 2020. And then when you think about, I guess, the cycle of what you need to build a company, you need funding, you need a team, you need a product, and they're all very intertwined with each other. At least I had broken that circular reference of funding, and so could start hiring a team off the back of that funding and then build a product and continue that cycle. So
for lots of people, the funding is the last one of that cycle that comes, right?
Yeah.
They think they have a product, they've got a team in place, but they're just struggling, and many people really struggle with that funding. What do you think enabled you to get that funding so early on?
I think a couple things. I would say it probably helped that I was very familiar with the problem that I was looking to solve. So while we didn't have a product or even designs that showed what the product would look like, from the research that we had, we could put a pretty succinct summary of what that product would look like, who the target market was, who the ideal customer profile was. We also had some early commits from like design partner customers who basically said, hey, when you're building it, we'll work with you to build it together. So that was good validation for investors. I think the other two things that I wouldn't be naive about is that, you know, December 2020 was a good time to be fundraising. It's probably very different from what it looks like today, or very different from what it looked like to start a business in December 2016, for example. So I would say the macroeconomic dynamics were definitely on our side, or on my side. And then the final thing is probably just having a network from previous roles, previous jobs. We thought that, you know, initially we would just raise an angel round. It ended up being a VC-led pre-seed round of around 1.2 million pounds. And the investors that had invested, I did have a previous relationship with from my time at Piton.
We hope you're enjoying the episode so far. We just want to give a quick shout out to our headline partners, HSBC Innovation Banking. One of the biggest challenges for so many startups is finding the right bank to support them. Because you might start off and try to use a traditional bank, but they don't understand what you're doing. You're just talking to an AI assistant, or you're talking to somebody who doesn't really understand what it is you're even trying to do. HSBC have got the team they've built out over years to make sure they understand what you're doing, they've got the deep sector expertise, and they can help connect you with the right people to make your dreams come true. So if you want to learn more, check out hsbcinnovationbanking.com. So at this point, obviously, you've just quit your job and you're taking the leap into entrepreneurship, and 3 months in, you've got $1 million in the bank, right?
Yeah.
You must be feeling pretty good at that point. But then also you have to get, but I say you also now have to get started in it, right? Like you get the team on board, get the product. So how did you go about using that money and trying to make sure you use it effectively?
While I felt good, I would say I probably felt more stressed than good. I think the second we had the money in the bank, I was like, oh, the clock has started. And so even if we're not spending money, even if, you know, we're obviously not marketing paying salaries, anything else right now, you know, investors still need a return. They need to see progress. And so I think I would say I probably spent the first 3 months just aggressively interviewing. I think from for 12 hours a day, each day, it was either finding candidates or interviewing candidates. So my LinkedIn outbound was enormous. Also tried other tools and just met as many people as possible. We then hired a contractor data scientist to start working with those design partner customers. Because the other thing is, yes, we had investor expectations, but we also had customers that had signed these design partner agreements who were like, okay, you're building something for us. What are you building? And so we hired a data scientist to start building a part of our product today that is the forecasting algorithm, by integrating and pulling data from a customer's historical data to build those forecasts that we could start showing customers early value without building a proper user interface.
And you said there about the team and getting those, you did so many interviews. What were you looking for? What did you want in those early team members? And did you feel you were quite successful in finding those traits? You
never know until you're doing it yourself. I remember that when I was at Piton, I read the book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, and I just didn't really get it. I was like, okay, this seems fine, but it all just seems so obvious. And then it wasn't until I read it, probably around that time period, that it just stuck with me. And I was like, this actually is a very good book. I just wasn't the right persona for it when I wasn't an entrepreneur. And so I think there's a lot about stage appropriateness of the mentality that somebody has to join a company from day zero, get it from that 0 to 1 phase, understand the speed of execution, how much that speed of execution matters, understand the value of iteration, not committing to things fully, MVPing, but then also just hard work and tenacity. And so I was looking for all of those. I would say as an entrepreneur, you get better at finding things over time, but maybe never perfect. But I would say over the last 3 years, there's a lot I've learned about hiring, what to look for, what to make sure you avoid that I wouldn't have known in those early 3 months.
And then with the product itself as well, right? So you had the idea of what you're going to build, but you didn't have the exact specifics of exactly what it's going to be. And I imagine it's kind of pivoted over time with iterations and things like that. What exactly is Surfboard today for the people who are listening to understand what it is exactly?
Yeah, so Surfboard is a workforce management software for customer service teams that enables them to predict the amount of tickets, calls, chats they'll get at any point in time. and schedule their teams accordingly so that you as a customer, for example, are never calling a customer service organization and left to wait on the phone for 20 minutes or emailing a customer service organization and not getting a response. So we build those optimization tools to make sure that the right people are available at the right time.
And then you smiled there, as I said, about the pivots along the way. What have been some of the things you've had to change along the way, or maybe the wrong alleys you took at some point, so you then had to backtrack and go in a different direction?
We built the product from May 2021. So that's when we started building the first version of the user interface. We released it. We had customers using it. I think we had about 20 customers using it. We raised our seed round in 2022. And then took the decision quite shortly after that seed round was raised that we were actually going to re-platform and rebuild the whole thing. Because while I do really believe that, in the early stages, you build things that don't scale, it became really, really hard for us to build additional features and additional capabilities on top of what we had already built. And so that was quite a limiting factor for us. I'd say what was really difficult about that decision is that it came from a very technical perspective. I think if I could revisit that decision today, there would be a lot more questions I would ask about speed of getting that new version out. So that ended up taking us about 5 to 6 months. And in startup land, when you're a seed company, 5 to 6 months is a lot of time. And so I count myself very fortunate and lucky that our investors were patient with us at that time. I don't know that I would be that patient. In hindsight, I think there were just a lot of unknowns, and I probably had a fair bit of imposter syndrome around asking questions. Around descoping, around prioritizing, deprioritizing, iterating, adjusting, to make sure we were building the right things in the right order, to get customer value out as quickly as possible.
So where did that imposter syndrome come from at that point? Why weren't you asking those questions, and why do you feel more comfortable to do so today, maybe?
I think as an entrepreneur, you always have to back yourself. I think there's two things that are never going to be untrue. Number one, you care about the business more than anybody else. And when you have that in your mind, that you care about the business more than anybody else, it gives you the right to ask all the questions. And it's always coming from a good place. You're not looking to attack anybody. You're just looking for one thing and one thing only, and that's to ensure and guarantee the success of the business. Number two is that as an entrepreneur, your instincts are usually right. And that just comes from surface area. And the surface area is that you're in all the customer conversations. You're reading all the updates from the product team. You're reading all the customer success notes about how customers are engaging. Nobody else has that surface area that you have. And I think that gives you the right to, again, ask questions from a good place, but also a place that has the most relevant context, that when you're speaking to, a product team or a tech team in isolation, they might just be missing context. And so sometimes the imposter syndrome comes from an assumption that everybody's working off the same information, and that usually is untrue.
Yeah, I think that's such a key point. I see it so much as well with different people I've interviewed, where we always think that everybody knows. I do it as well when I'm with my own team, right? So why didn't you know this? Well, because I haven't told you it.
Exactly, yeah.
If I haven't told you it, then how, and then you get frustrated. It's well, actually, yeah, like you said, if people don't know what you know, then how are they going to make the same decisions as you make, right?
Yeah.
And obviously now, so the version 2 has come out and it's going well, hopefully, touch wood. But could you share with us where you are today, and what's the biggest wins you've had? What you're most proud of? Yeah,
I would say that over the last 6 months, we've been working with larger and larger companies. And we've moved from a product that is part of a daily workflow to a product that drives a return on investment. And so I think the biggest wins are when customers come to us proactively. So we have a customer, Beauty Pie, for example, and we didn't ask them to do anything. And on their own accord, they surveyed their team to ask what the impact of Surfboard was and came up with stats of 100% of the team find their days clearer and easier to follow. 75% of the team are working on the right task on a more often basis. This has resulted in a 20% improvement in our service levels, and we've been able to make the international team much more efficient from a capacity or headcount perspective, resulting in X cost reduction. And so when you hear that come directly from customers unprovoked, it's so validating. Stuff like that where you wake up and you're like, this is why I do this every day. There's good days, there's bad days, but when you see that, it's definitely a good day that makes it all worth it. So I'd say that was definitely a win in the last few months. It's just the customer stories that have come out around success and utility they've gotten from the product. I think number two is in the way that the team has evolved their way of working. I think every startup has probably had to adjust over the last 2 years around, a new macroeconomic environment. I would say while Surfboard hasn't used the macroeconomic environment to force the adjustment, I think at the beginning we were in that 0 to 1 phase. And that 0 to 1 phase, you can be a bit scrambly. The pace can change at different times. You can feel like you're zigzagging around, but then when you go from that 1 to 10 phase, you really have to be moving a lot more linearly. And it feels like we've picked up our pace on that. And it's just made everything feel good. I take a lot of inspiration from football teams. And so I started watching that new Netflix Manchester City documentary. And while I'm not a Manchester City supporter,
who do you support?
I support Arsenal. Are you a Manchester City supporter?
United.
Okay, all right. So you dislike them probably more than I do. They are just a high-performing team. And you see the energy that high-performing teams have. You see how much of a snowball effect it has. And that's something that I really strive to build every day because I think results get more results. You have those managers of Premier League teams who win the Premier League. And they say, now's not the time to celebrate. The next thing to do is to win the Champions League. And I think that's the type of high-performance culture I really want Surfboard to have. And it feels like that's starting to develop.
So you've just set me up nicely for the next question. So
is it about football?
No, it's not about football, but it's about what is your Champions League? What is the big dream here coming forwards? What would you hope Surfboard, you can talk about, is doing in 5 years, 10 years' time?
Yes, for us, the Champions League is how we fundamentally evolve the way the customer support teams work. We're really lucky that when you look at what's happening in the world more broadly, we are at a really exciting phase in how customer service teams are changing. And I say that across two things. Number one, the development of AI. And number two, a bit more consolidation happening around the tech stack of where telephony providers sit, where CRM sit, and where we as a workforce management provider sit. And with artificial intelligence, we want Surfboard to be the default tool that is able to orchestrate a team that is, for example, 50% humans, 50% AI. And what we need to do first before we get there is get to a critical mass of customers that are working with us, working with the existing structure of mostly humans, maybe outsourcing agencies and a little bit of automation, and then help them on that journey to cross the chasm to becoming a much more efficient and optimized team with that.
So before we go to quick fire questions, I'll ask you one more. Where does the name Surfboard come from? It's quite a cool name.
I really like the name. One of our advisors and investors, Russell Davies, helped me come up with it. I was struggling to come up with a name, and then he did a bunch of word association, and I saw him go from bento box to switchbox to switchboard to surfboard. And I saw surfboard, and I was like, that is it. And I think what he hadn't pieced together when he got there on the word association was how much it resonates with the industry we're in, because often people refer to when you're getting lots of phone calls or lots of chats, you refer to it as a wave of inflow. And so when I saw Surfboard, I was like, yes, we are the tool that helps you navigate those waves.
No, very cool. I always have to ask, why did it start a bento box?
I have no idea how it got there. That's a very good question.
I was like, wait, what? Okay.
I actually really liked bento box as well, because I just feel like bento box is a nice visual prompt to think of how different things come together in a well-organized way. But we're not called bento box, unfortunately.
Okay, so we're going to go into quick fire questions now. Mm-hmm. So the first one is, who are 3 British Asians that you think are doing incredible work and you'd love to shout out for the audience?
Yes, the first one is our head of product, Sagar Haria. Sagar and I worked previously at Bulb. I was in so much admiration of him at Bulb that at the time I asked him to co-found Surfboard with me. He rejected me, but then 2 years later I was lucky enough to hire him as head of product, and working with him has been instrumental. The things that I describe around culture evolution, to be a lot more focused on performance, a lot more focused on results, the importance of speed of execution, he's been really instrumental towards deriving within the team. And then the other two, I would probably give a shout out to 2 of our investors. So Dipali Nangia from Speed Invest, who led our seed round and who's on our board. And Rashma Sahani from Seed Camp, who invested in our pre-seed round and followed on in our seed. Both of them have been great mentors. They've been great to spar ideas with. And I think they've also been the right type of investors who just understand the stage they're investing in, the challenges, the opportunities, the strategic, the tactical, and balanced everything very well together.
Awesome. So the next one is, If people want to find out more about you and find out more about Surfboard, where should they go to?
We're pretty active on LinkedIn, both myself and Surfboard. A lot of the stuff we talk about is customer service, but also just Surfboard news. So I'm on LinkedIn, Natasha Retenshi-Stein, and Surfboard is on LinkedIn, Surfboard.
And then is there anything that the audience could help you with today?
Look, we are moving across multiple fronts. We are always looking for customer service teams that want to work in modern ways of working, making things simpler, smarter, and fairer with the right automations. Number 2, we are hiring a head of commercial. This is an exciting role that crosses sales, marketing, and partnerships. And number 3, as we think about reinventing what customer service looks like in this hybrid AI and humans way, we are always looking to understand and research more organizations that have implemented AI, really to make sure that we're mapping out the right workflows and productizing them within what we do at Surfboard.
So thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great.
Have you got any final words?
No, I think this has been really great. Really enjoyed it. And look, I would say the same thing that people told me before I started Surfboard. Nobody ever regrets becoming an entrepreneur. You're never going to learn as fast. You're never going to work as hard. But it's certainly very worth it. And it feels like it adds a lot of meaning to what you do in your day-to-day work.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.